Welcome to the KidMin podcast with Dr. Val and Dr. Virginia, where we talk about everything KidMin
and pull back the curtain on some of the surprises and challenges in children's ministry that nobody prepares you for.
I'm Dr. Val, and together we have over 45 years of experience in children's ministry.
I'm Dr. Virginia. Valerie and I met over 10 years ago in our doctoral program at Southeastern Baptist Theological Seminary. We are excited to share with you all the great stuff that we have picked up over the years. We want to minister to you, the children's minister.
Welcome, friends. Thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Virginia and I are excited to be together talking about children's ministry again today. And we have a topic for you that is hopefully going to be helpful, but is definitely difficult. And that's exactly what we want to talk about, are difficult conversations, those conversations that we have in ministry that everybody has to have, that we all have to be prepared for, that come up regularly in your work in the church. It just is something that's going to happen. And we just thought that we would just talk for a few minutes about how we handle these difficult situations and things that we can do to try to make these conversations happen a little smoother.
Yes, because no one likes difficult conversations, but there are certain ways that we can approach it and certain just ways that we can prepare ourselves to make it go hopefully a little smoother. So,
yeah, for sure. And when we're talking about difficult situations, we were kind of thinking through some of the ones that we have had in the past that we have had to deal with over the years. And it's things like when you have maybe a volunteer in the children's ministry that is just not a good fit. And so you need to let them go. And so you need to have that conversation. It might be a teacher that's causing an issue that this is the beginning of it. And you need to have that conversation to let them know about what's happening and to see if you can help them improve so that they can stay a volunteer. We talked about what happens when there are issues with parents, late pickup when children are not being picked up on time, or discipline issues within the classroom, and you have to have those conversations. We were thinking about really just people who are annoyed with us over things. They don't like a particular event, or they don't like a particular rule,
policy.
Safety and security policies especially fall under that category, where we have people who just are really frustrated with the change that we've made or doesn't like the way that we do something. And so, we have those difficult conversations. And so, we have all of these kinds of things that come up on a weekly basis. And sometimes those conversations can be really quick and really easy, but most of the time these conversations can be really, really hard.
Yeah. And I think just with time, and I know we'll get into each of these individual ones, but I think just with time and experience, I don't know if it's like, I don't know if it's the process of developing a thicker skin or just kind of getting used to it too. It's sort of like just with time and experience and wisdom from other ministry leaders, it does get easier over time. But these conversations are never fun, and they're never just like a breeze, a walk in the park.
They're really not. I can remember when I was really young, one of the very first jobs that I had during a summer was a customer service job.
Oh, gosh.
So I worked with customer service, and I actually enjoyed the job. And it's really funny because with my personality, one would think that I would not handle it well when people were very angry and calling, but I don't know. There was something about it where I kind of could disassociate because I knew it wasn't my fault that the refrigerator wasn't working, so I was able to kind of take it a little bit better, I think. But we had a person come in to do a class one time on how to deal with difficult people. And I was super excited because I thought that this person was going to teach me how to tell people off and how to, really, like be strong in what I believed and fight the good fight and be able to really, do this confrontation thing well, because I didn't think I was very good at it. And then I found out that there are tools and ways that we can speak with people that can de-escalate a
Mhm.
situation, but
Yes.
not be confrontational in a negative way. And
Right.
it was sort of like I was almost disappointed at first because I was like, "Oh, I wanted to learn how to be one of those people that could really, tell somebody how I feel." But actually, I was finding out that most of the things that I was doing naturally were the types of things that you do to try to help these
Right.
situations and to be able to make a connection with people and to work on the relationship.
Mhm.
And so, I think that it's helped me over the years. I think back to that conference often and think, "Oh, I was so glad that I did that so young," because it
Right.
really helped me to be able to find some tools that I could use when I have these situations that come up. So hopefully we can talk through some of those today,
Mhm.
and we can give you some suggestions on how you can handle some of these difficult conversations. So
Well, and I liked what you said too before we get into the different areas. I liked what you
Mhm.
said too about make a connection
Mhm.
because I sometimes in some of these circumstances it can be, or at least I know for me and my personality, I like to be very precise. I like to be accurate. I mean, of course we all like to be correct,
Right,
but I have to learn to take my focus off of like accuracy and
right.
precision and
Mhm.
sometimes just listen to this person how they feel and focus on just like what you said the connection the relationship um and do that first like not that we don't ever correct people and not that we don't ever make sure everything's how it should be and correct and straight and whatever but like sometimes we just have to, for me and people with my personality as type A people, I have to like step back and be like, okay, I've got to focus on the relationship with this person first, and then we can sort the rest of that out later.
Right.
So,
Well, and I think that that's something that as a society in general, we're really struggling with right now is that
mm,
people can have very strong feelings about how
right.
they think something should be done or how something should be. And I will have to admit that for so many years, sometimes I looked at the world in a very black and white way. And I know that there are some things that we are going to stand on that are non-negotiable, that that are the things that are important and that to keep people
Mhm.
safe and to follow doctrine and all of these kinds of things that we need to be able to really focus on. But also one thing that I've really come to learn over the years is that even though that's my personal belief, that's not everyone's personal belief. And if I want people to respect my beliefs and what I'm saying, then I have to respect others and what they're saying. And so I think that a lot of times we just have to say, I see where you're coming from because of the way you feel and just empathize in some ways,
Mhm.
even if that doesn't mean that's going to change your policy or it's going to change what you do, but just to have that opportunity just to kind of walk through the situation with a
Mhm.
person and not be so determined to be right that you let that
Yes.
overshadow a relationship with a church
Yes.
member.
Yep.
And
Absolutely.
so yeah.
Absolutely. Yep.
So I think actually you really have already said the very first thing that I think is really important, and that is that we listen, that we give
Absolutely.
the person a chance to talk. And that can
Mhm.
be so hard when we want
Mhm.
to explain our point of view or we want to explain why. But so many
Mhm.
times people just want to be heard.
Mhm. Absolutely. And it's like I think back to that was definitely something I feel like I learned early on with a parent who expressed a concern about a situation with their child. And I I think, my desire, which wasn't a wrong desire, which was to try to, I think, explain, okay, well, this is why this volunteer did that. Like this was their thought process. This was how this happened. Like that should have been secondary to making that parent feel heard and feel like they've been listened to and feel like their concern, not that I didn't take it seriously, but like just feel
Right,
heard and feel
right,
listened to. And so yeah, so I feel like that was something that I definitely learned very early on was that it's more important to listen
right, right. Well, and that's
than
what
it
I
is to
really try
talk.
to do because usually
Yeah.
usually the conversations start on a Sunday morning in the hallway, when you have a very upset person kind of coming up to you and saying, you need to listen to me right now, or you need to hear
Mhm.
this, or this is something
Mhm.
that happened.
Mhm.
And one of the things that I always tried to do at the very beginning was to let them know I wanted to hear them. I wanted
Mhm.
to understand, but we might need to do this at another time. I would try to explain, I'm in the middle of teaching, I'm in the middle of, headed to a
Mhm.
class, or those kind of things. And just to say, immediately say, you let me know when would be a good time for us to
Mhm.
discuss this,
Mhm.
and really make it super simple for them to
Mhm.
discuss it with you. You really try to
Mhm.
open up your schedule as much as you can to have this conversation. But I really, really tried to make sure we didn't have the conversation in the heat of the moment,
Out in the open, in the public
in the
area, like in the
hallway.
foyer.
Right.
Yes.
Especially
Yes.
when you need your attention to be in other places. And
Right.
so I think it's really important to have that mindset where you're saying, I really want to listen to you
Mhm.
because what you have to say is super important to me. So I would like to be able to give you my full attention for
Mhm.
this conversation. So are you available tomorrow morning to come to the office, or tomorrow after you get off work, or, Wednesday night before service,
Can
or,
I give you a call this
Mhm.
afternoon? Can we
Right.
talk about it on the phone?
Mhm.
Like, yeah, yeah.
Find that time, so that you can say, but to be sure though that you start off with letting them know, I really want to hear what you have to
Mhm.
say. What you have to say is very important to me. I
Mhm.
want to have that opportunity to talk with you, but let's try not to. But it also gives them hopefully an opportunity to calm down just a
Yeah.
little bit, because you don't
Yeah.
want to have those conversations when somebody is super heated,
Mhm. Mhm.
because that
Yeah.
that never tends to go well, and so it gives them an opportunity to kind of take a deep breath. And as long as it's not an emergency situation where it's like
Right.
somebody is going to be hurt
Right.
immediately,
Right.
like that kind of thing. But if it's somebody that's wanting to critique something about the ministry, or they're upset about the way a teacher handled something, or they're upset
Mhm.
about the fact that the safety and security policies have changed, those kinds of things are typically
Mhm.
things that can wait, that you can let
Mhm.
them know, can we just have some time before we talk about it? Because, right
Mhm.
now, my attention, I want to give you my full attention. And right now,
Mhm.
I can't give you
Can't
my
do
full
that.
attention.
Mhm. And even so, even if it's at a point where maybe you do have the time, I always try to have those conversations privately. So even if, at pickup time a parent wants to talk, I'll be like, "Hey, let's go over here. Let's go, let's step
Mhm.
aside, step down this hallway, go somewhere
Right.
where it's not public
Right.
either."
Right.
So, yeah.
But I do think it's very important, if you've worked with this person before, if you know that the situation could be difficult, if you know
Mhm.
that they could be very angry,
Oh, yeah.
if you have had situations before where conversations have been misunderstood,
Mhm.
or if this person is just very difficult, to has a hard time understanding,
Yeah.
then I think it's
Yeah.
a good idea for you to have somebody with you for that conversation. Maybe
Absolutely.
ask for, another
Mhm.
person to be present, whether it's,
Mhm.
maybe someone else from your staff, or,
Mhm.
someone that could just sit in
Mhm.
and be a part of the conversation, so that you
Mhm.
have another person that's hearing what you say, so
Exactly.
that way somebody doesn't walk away misunderstanding something,
Mhm.
or
Mm.
misspeaking about something that
Mhm.
you've said. And so I
Mhm.
think it can be really important. So you might want to think about those situations. If you think it's going to be very difficult, you might want to have that second person in the room with you.
And another thing to do after some of these more difficult conversations, in addition to having a second person in the room, is to follow up with an email, to write out what was discussed, what was agreed on, or what was not agreed on. Just kind of give a little summary of the conversation. Dear so and so, thank you so much for meeting with me today. I appreciated our conversation. We talked about A, B, and C. Thank you. Bye.
Right.
Just something simple like that, as additional documentation
Right.
of what was said or what was agreed on in maybe some of those more difficult conversations.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's a very wise thing to do. And so, well, when you're actually having the conversation, I always think that it's incredibly important, like I said, if somebody's very upset about something, if they have initiated the conversation, I think it's really important that we listen and let them say everything they need to say. Like, let them finish their thoughts. Don't try to interrupt with, explaining things or giving your reasonings and that kind of thing at first. Just let them go ahead and just get everything kind of out. Listen to them, repeat back to them what they've said to you as you're going through the conversation, so that
So am
they
I
know that you're
understanding
listening.
that you're saying da 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 da? Yeah.
Right. So that they are sure that you're listening, that you're taking them very seriously, that you're listening very well. And then at that point, then that gives you the opportunity to be able to go forward with explaining. And this is the deal. It always amazed me that usually if somebody was super upset about a policy or a procedure or something that we had that happened, once they understood the reason why we have that policy,
Yes.
it's almost like a light bulb will go off and they'll go, "Oh, I never thought about that." And sometimes it's such a simple thing that we think is obvious. Well, of course there's a reason why we have this policy. It's this. And that just seems so obvious to us because we're in the middle of it, and we're the
Right.
one, we're the ones working it,
Yeah.
and we're the ones. But for so many people that don't work with children or don't work in
Yeah.
ministry or aren't familiar with what's happening somewhere, they may not understand that. And so it might be just as simple as saying, I understand, I agree. It's really frustrating, but let me tell you why we do this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that goes for a lot of our safety and security policies. And a lot of that is that the more we can educate our church, the more we can educate our volunteers, our parents, and our church at large as much as you can about the reasoning behind these policies, about why we're doing what we're doing, that these things that we do, they are best practice. We're not the only church in the world that
Right.
locks our doors and has a check-in system and all this
Right.
other stuff. I think the more people can be educated, the more you can kind of head those things off at the pass, but not, you're always going to get that kind of stuff. It was funny. I was telling Valerie, it was a week or two ago, I had a senior adult express to me, their frustration that we have sort of a main sort of almost breezeway that unfortunately is a main traffic area that goes through our preschool area, which is less than ideal. But anyway, that's how it was built. And but all of our other doors are locked. So there's one way in the building, one way out. It's through that breezeway. And so, a senior adult kind of expressed their frustration and said, well, you could go anywhere you wanted in the building, and I just kind of tried to remind, just like what you're saying, remind about safety and security issues. I said, well, we want to stay safe and we want to keep our kids safe and that sort of thing. And so, it's just funny. I mean, you'll get these questions. We'll get these questions from now until Jesus comes back.
Oh, for sure. And we have for years.
Just
I
part
mean,
of
I
it.
thought,
Yeah.
from when every church pretty much that I've ever attended or consulted with, that is the biggest problem. People have a connection with their church. It becomes a second home.
Right.
And they are very comfortable there, and they're very used to how everything is laid out, and they're very used to how things go. And they don't think about other situations that might occur that should protect the church in different
Right.
ways,
Right.
whether it's I can't even tell you the number of conversations I have with senior adults that were very upset the doors were locked, that they could not come through certain areas of the building the way they used to be able to, that they couldn't cut through when it was raining, or they couldn't come, that kind of thing, because that's just a very, very normal thing that's happened. I can remember at one church where we attended, it was a large church that had several different additions to it, and it
Right.
had no signage whatsoever. And so a committee had been put together to put signs up so that you could find your way around. And we had just started attending that church. We had just started there. So we were not super familiar with the building. And it just so happened that an older lady walked up to me in the lobby, and she was just like, "This is a waste of money. I do not understand why we need signs. Everybody knows where everything is in this building. We don't have to have signs." And, I sort of looked at her and I said, actually, we just started attending here a couple of months ago. So we're new to the church. And I am honestly on my way to a meeting right now in a building that I don't know where it's located. So And she was like, "You don't know where, the D building is?" And I was like, "No, ma'am, I'm sorry, I sure don't. I was actually gonna ask somebody which way to go because I haven't learned my way around yet." And she said, "Well, I didn't think about new people needing to know where to go." And so it had just never occurred to
Occurred to
her.
her.
And so
Yeah.
it's so
Yeah.
many things, not just safety and security, but even just the
Right.
most basic things for visitors and for our children and for different ministries where people just are so comfortable and so accustomed
Mhm.
to the way things have always been. And it
Yeah.
just takes somebody kind of reminding them, "Oh,
Mhm.
yeah, you wouldn't know where that is, would you? Because you've never been here before." And so, it takes that. It takes that sometimes to be able to have those conversations. So, now if you are actually starting the conversation yourself, like if this is a difficult conversation that you are having to have with somebody, whether it's with a parent or with a teacher or with, a volunteer that's doing something for you and you have to have those conversations. For me, what I always like to start with are the positives.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
sometimes I know that that's really hard to come up with, but it's really, really important that you start off
Yeah.
by thanking the volunteer for everything they've done, for telling the
Mhm.
teacher what a
Mhm.
great job they do with crafts, or to let the parent know how much you love having Tommy at the church, that Tommy is a great kid and that we love him here. And, when he plays with blocks, he just does the best job with stacking. You find
Mhm.
those kinds of really positive things to start with. I learned that really early when I would do teacher evaluations. When I was principal at a Christian school, I would do teacher evaluations, and I always hated it when I was the teacher, when I would be evaluated and it was just, you did this wrong, you did this wrong, you did this wrong. Because, technically
Yeah.
on those forms, yes, you have to have 3 areas of improvement. It's that's a state that was a state requirement. You had to have 3 areas of improvement. But, it never hurt, I thought, just to start off with, "This is something that I saw you do that was really great." It really helps because that person doesn't feel like they're on the defensive at the very
Mhm.
beginning of the
Yeah.
conversation. They don't feel like you've just jumped in and said, "Okay, I need to talk about how you greet your kids when they come to the door," or "I need you," you don't have to have those like really harsh beginnings, but starting with the positives can really help just sort of soften the conversation
Mhm.
at the very
Mhm.
beginning. And
Yeah.
so thinking through how you can really thank somebody and encourage them, or even if a person comes to you with something like the lady came to you about the doors being
The
locked,
locked doors.
just to say, even if you say something like, "I appreciate that you feel comfortable enough to come talk to me." It's finding that start to your part of the conversation that can begin in a positive way. And
Right.
then you can go into explaining, this is why we have this policy. These are the things that we worry
Mhm.
about. These are the things that concern us. Always make sure that you let them know too, this is something that our church has. Don't put it all on yourself, because
Right.
obviously your
Right.
church staff has come to the decisions that you
Right.
have come to with these kinds of things. And to say,
Right.
that our committee or our church or our staff,
Mhm.
believes our insurance company
Yeah.
requests, finding those ways to be able to let them
Mhm.
know that it's not just something that you've come up with off the top of your
Right.
head,
Right.
but that it's been discussed and that we spent a lot of time to set up this
Mhm.
policy and we have really, reviewed things. So to let them know that you've really taken that kind of time, so
Mhm.
that they can understand that is, I think, really important.
Absolutely. And whenever I approach these sort of difficult conversations, I want it to be like, I always want my demeanor and my approach to be like one that's very informative. Like, I am informing you of something
Mhm.
that's important. I
Right.
don't ever want to portray things in a way of like, okay, I'm accusing you of doing
Right.
something or whatever.
Right.
Like, I am informing you of a concern that was brought to me. I am
Right.
informing you of this policy and its importance. And so,
Right.
I always want my tone and my demeanor to be one that's very informational and educational,
Right.
and I'm giving you this information for your
Mhm.
benefit because it's important for you to understand this and to know this.
Right.
And one thing too, this isn't at the start of conversations, but one thing too, whenever people bring concerns to me. Just like what you were saying, how you would sometimes start a conversation. Thank you for feeling comfortable sharing this with me. I always
Right.
include in there at some point, just like, hey, thank you for bringing this to me, because if you have a concern, I can't know what it is unless you tell me. I can't
Right.
address it. I can't do anything unless you tell
Mhm.
me. So thank you
Right.
for sharing this with me.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and I think that what you were saying before is really important too, because it's the idea of handling the information as facts and not emotion.
mhm,
Don't let yourself feel defensive. Don't let yourself
mhm,
feel like you're being attacked, even though sometimes you might be, honestly. But if you can make sure that you look at this as, I'm going to give you all of the factual information that
mhm,
I have about this.
mhm,
This is why we do this. I'm not going to take this personally,
mhm.
because 9 times out of 10, it really isn't personal.
Right.
They're not really out to get you. They're not out, to cause you problems. Usually it's either just a very sensitive issue for them, or it's something that they are very concerned about, but they
Mhm,
they have somehow taken it on emotionally and taken it
mhm.
personally. And so you just happen to be the person that they are taking it out on, or that they're coming to
Yeah.
discuss. And so
Yeah.
it's really just kind of being able to disconnect yourself in a little way, to be able to
Mhm,
just say, okay, let me look at this in a very logical, very, factual kind of manner, and try to keep the emotions out of it as much as possible, so that
mhm,
you can, kind of help de-escalate that person. Because I think when we respond in that way, because if we do respond emotionally,
mhm,
if we get angry or offended or upset, then that just fuels the fire.
mhm.
Typically, it's not gonna make the situation better. And so I think
Right.
it's really, really important that we do that.
And whenever we are initiating conversations with
Mhm.
people about things that need to change or whatever, um, just like what you're saying, focusing on facts, because, you know, we're not responsible for changing other people's feelings,
Right.
but we are responsible for ensuring that the policies are carried out, for,
Right.
ensuring that actionable things are happening that should be happening. So
Right.
so feelings of other people are not our responsibility,
Right.
but following policy, taking appropriate action, that is.
Mhm.
And so that's one of the reasons why we focus on the facts of,
Mhm.
here's what happened, here's what needs to happen in the future,
Mhm.
um, because that is what we can change and what we can affect. So,
Right. For sure. And one of the things that I like to do too is to make sure that if I'm going to be talking with a leader about something that has happened, I'd like it to be something that I can verify if possible. Like, for
yeah.
example, if I have a leader that is not appropriately welcoming the kids when they come to the classroom, and another teacher or a parent or someone, comes to me and says, I really don't like the way that this leader does A, B, or C. Instead of just immediately going to the leader to
Mm,
talk to them about A, B, or C, I
mhm.
try to make sure that I see it myself. Like, I'm going to kind of
Right.
hang out by that door
Right.
for a couple of Sundays and listen,
Right.
or I'm gonna, come into that classroom to get supplies or something, to kind of see how they're leading the Bible study time, or I'm gonna,
Mhm.
do those, because what can tend to happen is, a lot of times people will be upset about something and tell you about something, and they have
Right.
misseen something, or maybe it
Right.
wasn't as bad as they've made it sound for one
Mhm.
reason or another.
Mhm.
And what ends up happening then is that you have a lot of, I never did that. And then, you have to
Right.
go back to the other person. They said they didn't do it. Well, I saw them do that, like, but if
Right.
you can verify it for
Right.
yourself, and I know that there are some situations that you can't, it's not
Mhm.
possible. But if there's any way that you can take a little bit of time and maybe talk to somebody else that could have been present at the time, or,
Mhm.
see what you can observe yourself, so that you have some firsthand knowledge, so that you're not going to have to say, well, Virginia told me that.
Mhm.
Because you really don't want to throw other people under the bus, but you also don't
Right.
want to cause any more conflict than you have to. But to be able to
Right.
say, I was standing by the door the other day and I happened to notice that you said this. And I was wondering if there is a way that I could help you find another way that we could, welcome the kids to the classroom, or whatever it was, or another way that you can tell this Bible story, or another way, and so that you kind of have that opportunity to really make sure that it's something that you are familiar with that you have seen
Mm-hmm.
happen yourself?
Because people have different expectations, and it could be a situation where a parent has an expectation, but it
Mhm.
may not be your expectation, or it may not be the norm, or it may not
Mhm.
be, how you actually want things to be followed, the procedures that you want to follow. And
Right.
so, just because someone has a complaint, again, we want them to feel heard. We want them to bring their concerns to us, but we may not always take the exact sort of action
Right.
that a parent or whoever expects.
Right.
So,
Right.
we will handle it in a way that is consistent with our policies and procedures and
Mhm.
what we expect for our ministry.
Right.
So,
Oh, for sure.
yeah.
Well, yeah. And I think that that kind of goes hand in hand too, that when you have somebody that's upset and that they're coming to you and they're telling you what they're upset about, for us to make sure that we are very careful in what we tell them is going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
Because if sometimes out of a heat of a moment, we can make promises that we can't necessarily keep.
Right.
And so we
Right.
want to make sure that if we are telling the parent or the leader or the volunteer or the staff member or whoever we're talking with, if
Mm-hmm.
they say, well, this teacher did this, and you're like, okay, well, they won't ever be teaching here again. And then you find out,
Ooh,
oh, wait a minute. They
that
maybe
wasn't
didn't do exactly
exactly.
what they said. And so,
Yeah.
you don't want to get caught up in the heat of the moment. You always want to let them know, okay, I understand what you say. I'm very concerned about what you've mentioned. Let me do some checking and we'll see what we need to do, to take care of the situation, and not make any kinds of promises one way or the other, because again, you kind of never know what the situation is really going to be once you get into that situation. But you also
Mm-hmm.
just never quite know what your senior pastor may decide about what you should do about a particular situation. You never know that,
Mm-hmm.
you might get into a situation where you say, well, oh, I promise that door will always be open from now on, when, you find out, oh, there's a reason why that door is not open for you anymore or something. So,
Right.
you just want to make sure that you're really careful with those kinds of things. I think really the key to this too is that you are able to explain your reasons behind whatever the conversation is about,
Yeah.
and that you make sure that you really explain well why something has to be done.
Right.
If there is a church member who is upset about a locked door or a hallway change or having security or whatever thing that they might be frustrated with, to really make sure that you explain why this policy is in place. This is the
Mm-hmm.
reason why. So you want to make sure that you have time to be able to really explain, this is why we have this done. When you
Mm-hmm.
have a leader that you're working with that maybe is just not a good fit anymore in the ministry, in the children's ministry, if you can explain to them, and like I said, say as many positives as you can, but then explain, this is the issue that we're having right now, where I just really think that, maybe and another thing is that sometimes I would try to kind of take the hit.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to apologize because, I really think that I placed you in the wrong location.
Mm-hmm.
I really
Mm-hmm.
didn't take time to see my needs, or I didn't take time to see, where your best fit would be. And I have
Mm-hmm.
learned that you were so great with the parents that I could really use you as a hall director
Mm-hmm.
so much more than a classroom teacher.
Mm-hmm.
Or, maybe have already talked ahead of time with another pastor and said, you know what, they really, really need you in the adult ministry right now to be a greeter, because you are so great at this. And so I think that, it's, finding those ways that you can kind of soften that just a little
Mm-hmm.
bit to help them to be able to have those conversations. And it's really kind of, explaining why there are some hills you have to die on. I think I've
Yeah.
probably said
Amen.
that before. I say that a lot.
Amen.
Their safety and security, for example,
Yeah.
I'm always going to take the hit for safety and security. You can be as mad at me as you want for background checks, but background checks are going to happen. You're
Mm-hmm.
not going to talk me out of that.
Amen.
And so, there are going to be hills that I'm going to die on. What kind of craft the kids do for vacation Bible school, if it's,
May.
that I might be able to be more flexible on, I might be able to do it. Although I did have a lady many years ago that got very mad at me because I wouldn't let her do a craft that was very inappropriate for kids. But and she was very, she went to the pastor. It was a whole thing. So things like that can happen. She was just determined that
We're
she
going
wanted
to
the
cover
kids
an
to do this.
anatomically correct Adam and Eve with glitter.
Yeah. See, it's just like, so that hill I'm going to die on, so it's, you kind of you do have to pick and choose your battles a lot of times and what you can change and what you can't change. But I think it's really important that we make sure that we explain, why we're doing something, and that we really help that person try to understand. But I am going to say this, they're not always going to understand.
No.
And that's why I said there's those hills that you do have to die on, where, there are things that they are never going to be happy with, no matter how you explain it. And you have to be okay with that. And there is that point in the conversation where you have to say, I am so sorry, but this is just a policy that we have, chosen to do. And if you, if you'd like to speak with the pastor, I'm sure you can make an appointment, those kind of things. You have to have those conversations. But
yeah. Well, and too, like thinking about, giving you reasons, like I think too, a time where it was the end of the night after a special event on a Sunday night, and my brain was like mush. So, and I had someone come to me with a concern, in that moment, in that, end of the service, end of the night, my brain is mush. My words that came out were mush. So I did have to go back and kind of be like, okay, that I did not give a good explanation at all in the moment. Let me be a little clearer, the next day. So yes, we want to communicate our expectations very clearly and communicate our reasonings very clearly. Right. And sometimes that means going up, following up on things that we didn't say very well the first time around.
Right.
And that's okay too, because, I was frustrated with myself afterwards. I was like, man, the reasons, why, you have the explanations for all this, and so I was frustrated with myself, but also to be like, okay, I'm human too. And if I have to go back and repeat and explain and elaborate, that's just part of it. So, it is. But I'd much rather be clear,
right,
than to, leave my mush words. The last thing I explained.
That is why it is so great when we can have the opportunity to say, can we talk about this tomorrow? Can I give you a call tomorrow? Can you come by tomorrow? Or, that kind of things that gives you that time, because it's true sometimes, and we are going to misspeak. And sometimes we do just have to go with our hat in our hand and say, I am so sorry. I was having a rough day, or I misunderstood you, or, whatever the reason might be that we might not have said something completely correctly, and that we have to come back and say, I if you don't mind. And I think that's just being human, and that's part of it. And sometimes it does take more than one conversation, because we do have days that it's just, when you've got the fifth person coming to you to complain about a locked door, sometimes your brain just goes, nope, we're done. You
just got the little spinning loading wheel in your brain.
It's like it's just like, no, this isn't going to happen today, and I just can't do it. I think another way that's really good for you to kind of close up these conversations is with prayer. If you can, and I'm a big pray at the beginning of the meeting and pray at the end of the meeting.
That's what I was about to say. That can diffuse a lot of tension if you open in prayer. Good long prayer.
Oh,
not an imprecatory prayer.
No, just give us wisdom. Give us the words to say. Calm our hearts.
Amen.
Having those moments where you just ask God to please be present in the conversation. So it's good. But I think ending it with prayer is the same, especially if it is conflict that's still continuing, or a situation that you're going to have to follow up on. Take a moment to ask the person if there's something specifically that you can pray for them about. Ultimately, we are ministering to our church family in our positions, whether you're a volunteer or whether you're paid staff. We are ministering to people. There is somebody that I enjoy following. His name is Carlos Whitaker on Instagram. And one of the things that he is constantly talking about is how we should not stand on issues, but walk with people. And I love just the thought of the fact that we need to remember that usually when somebody is frustrated, there is another thing that they're frustrated about than what they're talking to you about. Yes. And so if we can just have that mindset of wanting to minister to the people that we spend our time with, that we see each Sunday, that we're working with, that we're talking with. And we just take a moment to say, is there something that I can pray for you about? And just take that time to pray with them while you're spending time talking about the situation. We get so caught up in administrative issues sometimes. And, oh, I've got to have this done, or I want this conversation to be done, or I want to, I've got this next thing that I've got to get to. But I think that it's important that we are taking time to really see the person and to really try to meet them where they are. And I think that that needs to be the priority. And then you've already mentioned this, but I think it's really important to mention again is that follow-up is key. It really is. And I know that sometimes we don't ever want to talk to this person again. We don't ever want to have to think about this situation ever again.
Don't want to talk about the door ever again.
I don't want to even have to think about this again. But it's just like you said earlier, it's really great to have documentation of a conversation.
Yeah.
It gives you that opportunity so that if it ever does, like, for example, if that person does go back to the pastor and says, well, the children's minister never met with me, and you can go back and say, well, I sent you this email the day after we met and it's got the date on it. And, you have that opportunity to be able to let your staff know, now this has been discussed before, and these are the things that you discussed. And, and like you said, to kind of say, okay, we talked about A, B, and C, and I really appreciate your time. And if there's any more I can do, also one of the things that's really important when you are doing follow-up, especially if you're dealing with a situation with a teacher, a parent, a discipline issue with a child, you may have to let the person know that they won't know what happens next.
Yes. Right.
Because in not all situations, but in some situations, you have to maintain confidentiality, and you can't really go into detail if that person's not involved. And sometimes even if that person is involved, there are things that you can't, continue, if it's a health issue, if it's a discipline issue, those kinds of things, you really just have to sort of end with asking the person, that you just have to trust me that I will take care of this. And if you have any other issues, or if you see another problem, if it's something that you have to report to DHS, if it's something, there's all sorts of little intricate, and we haven't gone into specifics about a lot of the conversations, so we can't explain every detail. But the idea is that there may be something that you have to tell the person, I'm sorry, I can't let you know what DHS says after I report it, or I can't tell you, what particularly happened with this particular child that has a health issue, or, those kinds of things. You might have to say, I can't follow up with you about that, but you can follow up with them about the conversation that you had, and just to assure them that you took it very seriously and you appreciated their time, and that, that you're going to follow through on the things that you told them that you would.
Appropriate action has been taken.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that's just, sometimes that's all that you can do for certain situations. And so that's, the best that you've got. So, well, Dr. Virginia, this has been a fun conversation. As hard as this conversation is, it's nice to be able to just sort of walk through and talk through these kinds of things that happen, because I don't care how long you're in ministry. If you've only been a children's minister for 3 months, or if you've been one for 30 years, you are very familiar with having to have these conversations. And so hopefully we have encouraged you, to let you know that you're not alone, but hopefully we've given you some things, actionable things that you can do that will help you maybe with the next conversation that you have. We just appreciate so much that you spend time with us, that you take time out of your day to join us in these conversations. It is our heart's desire that we meet you where you are, and that we can help you serve your families and your children in your ministries. Please let us know if there's a topic you would like us to discuss. Please let us know if you have questions, if there's ever anything that we can do. Like I said, our heart is to serve you. And we just thank you for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye-bye.